Every pattern you repeat or every choice you can't explain and every version of yourself you keep returning to has a blueprint. Welcome to the Echo Principle, where we map the unseen architecture of human behavior. If you think carefully, you belong here, so drop a like and make sure to subscribe to our channel. There is a woman in a hospital in Rome. She is trying to button her shirt. Her right hand reaches for the top button, works it through the hole, moves to the next. And then her left hand reaches up and undoes it. She buttons it again. The left hand undoes it again. She looks down at her left hand. She has not told it to do this. She is not doing this. The hand is. This is not a metaphor. This is not a figure of speech borrowed from psychology to make a point about internal conflict. This happened. This is documented. There are dozens of cases like it, stretching back over a century, and every single one of them forces the same question to the surface: what exactly do we mean when we say, I? Because if your hand can act against your will, against your conscious wishes, against everything you are trying to do in that moment, then the hand is not you. But it is also not you. It grew from the same body. It runs on the same blood. It was shaped by the same life. And yet it is doing something you did not choose: alien hand syndrome. That is the clinical name. It sounds like science fiction. It is not. The first serious description of what we now call alien hand syndrome appeared in 1908. A German neurologist named Kurt Goldstein documented a patient whose left hand would reach out and grab her own throat while she slept. She would wake up choking, her own fingers pressing into her neck. Her right hand would have to physically fight the left hand off. Pry it loose. Force it down. Goldstein called it die Fremde Hand. The strange hand. The foreign hand. For decades the condition was treated as a curiosity. A neurological footnote. Something rare enough that most physicians would never encounter it, and strange enough that it lived in the literature without much pressure to explain it. But the explanations, when they came, would turn out to be more unsettling than the symptoms, because alien hand syndrome is not one condition. It is several, each one pointing to a different region of the brain, each one revealing something different about how the architecture of the mind distributes control over the body. And the most famous trigger, the one that opened the deepest questions, was an operation. A surgical procedure designed to save lives. A procedure that worked exactly as intended and produced, as a side effect, something the surgeons had not fully anticipated. Point 2 minds. In one skull. Epilepsy, in its most severe forms, is devastating. Grand mal seizures. The kind that throw a person to the ground, lock every muscle, stop breathing. The kind that cascade from one hemisphere of the brain to the other across a thick bundle of nerve fibers called the corpus callosum. The corpus callosum is the great connector. Approximately 200 million axons binding the left hemisphere and the right hemisphere into a single coordinated system. In the 1960s, a neurosurgeon named Joseph Bogan, working with a team that included the psychologist Roger Sperry, began severing the corpus callosum in patients with catastrophic epilepsy. The logic was precise. If the seizure travels across the bridge, destroy the bridge. The seizures either stopped or became dramatically less severe. The patients could function. They could hold conversations. They could go home. By most measures, they were fine. Roger Sperry would win the Nobel Prize in 1981 for what the split brain experiments revealed. But what they revealed was not simple. It was not reassuring. It suggested that the unified self we experience, the singular I am narrating your life right now, is not a given. It is a construction. And it is more fragile than we want to believe. The split brain patients looked normal. Spoke normally. Walked normally. Held jobs. Maintained relationships. And yet Sperry's experiments, along with those of his student Michael Gazzaniga, began to expose something extraordinary underneath that surface. The left hemisphere and the right hemisphere, it turns out, are not simply two halves of one thing. They process the world differently. They have different priorities, different specializations. The left hemisphere, in most people, handles language, logic, sequential reasoning. The right hemisphere handles spatial processing, holistic pattern recognition, certain kinds of emotional reading. When the corpus callosum is intact, these two systems communicate constantly, thousands of times per second. The result is seamless integration. You do not experience two streams of processing. You experience one. Cut the corpus callosum, and the two hemispheres continue to function. But they can no longer talk to each other. And Sperry and Gazzaniga found a way to interrogate them separately. They would flash an image to only the left visual field, which feeds into the right hemisphere. Then ask the patient what they saw. The patient would say nothing, because the left hemisphere, which controls speech, had not received the information. But if you asked the patient to point to the object with their left hand, controlled by the right hemisphere, they would point correctly. Every time. They knew. They just could not say it. This is the moment the ground shifts. Because here is what it means. Inside the split-brain patient, there is a system that perceives, processes, and acts on information that the speaking, narrating, verbal self has no access to. The right hemisphere knows things the left hemisphere does not know. And the left hemisphere, which is the one doing the talking, the one answering the researcher's questions, the one saying, "I don't know what you showed me," is not lying. It genuinely doesn't know. There are two experiences in that skull, and only one of them can speak. Gazzaniga would later develop what he called the interpreter theory. The left hemisphere, he argued, is constantly generating explanations for behavior. It watches what the body does and it constructs a narrative. It tells a story. And it tells that story so convincingly, so automatically, that it experiences the story as truth. When a split-brain patient's right hemisphere causes the left hand to pick up an object, and you ask the patient why they picked it up, the left hemisphere does not say, "I don't know." It confabulates. It invents a reason. A plausible, confident, entirely fabricated reason. And the patient believes it completely. This is not unique to split-brain patients. Gazzaniga argued this is what all of us are doing, all of the time. Now return to the alien hand. Because split-brain surgery is one cause, but not the only one. Alien hand syndrome also emerges from strokes, tumors, and neurodegenerative diseases that damage specific regions of the brain. The supplementary motor area in the frontal lobe. The anterior cingulate cortex. The corpus callosum itself through localized damage rather than surgical section. What these regions share is involvement in the coordination of voluntary movement and the mediation of competing motor programs. When they're damaged, something comes loose. A hand begins to act on intentions that are not the conscious mind's intentions. Or more precisely, intentions that the conscious mind is not aware of having. The alien hand is not random. This is critical. People assume it is chaos. It is not. The hand reaches for objects that are contextually relevant. It picks up cups. It turns pages. It unbuttons clothes. It grabs nearby arms. It acts purposefully, goal-directed, as if it knows what it is doing. It is just that the goal is not the one the person consciously chose. What the alien hand is acting on is something deeper than conscious intention. Something older. A layer of motor programming that runs beneath awareness. A self below the self. There was a case documented in the 1990s of a man referred to in the literature as DB. He had suffered a stroke that damaged his corpus callosum and portions of his frontal lobe. His left hand began to interfere with daily tasks. When he tried to open a door, his left hand would push it closed. When he reached for food, his left hand would push the plate away. When his wife came close to him, his left hand would push her back. He was distressed, profoundly distressed. He would apologize to his wife after each episode. He would look at his hand with what he described as a feeling of betrayal. He said, at one point, that he felt he was sharing his body with someone who disagreed with him. Someone who had opinions, preferences, someone who was not him. The clinical literature on alien hand syndrome is populated with similar descriptions. Patients who scold their alien hand, who call it by a different name, who engage in what can only be described as negotiation with a body part. One patient reportedly named her alien hand and would address it directly when it acted up, telling it to stop, sometimes reasoning with it. And here is what is disquieting about that. The reasoning sometimes worked. There are documented cases where patients learn to manage the alien hand through environmental strategy and, in some cases, through direct verbal command. The alien hand is not entirely beyond reach. It is not a completely closed system, which means it is listening, or something in it is listening. It is responsive to a voice it will not obey. It has a relationship with the self it is fighting. Researchers have noted that tactile stimulation can sometimes interrupt alien hand behavior. Holding an object in the alien hand, keeping it occupied, giving it something to grip so it cannot interfere with the actions of the controlled hand. Patients develop workarounds, strategies, a kind of management relationship with a part of themselves that has gone rogue. This raises something that the neurological literature tends to treat clinically, but that carries real philosophical weight. If a part of your nervous system can pursue goals, respond to language, adapt to strategy, and be partially negotiated with, what is it exactly? What is the ontological status of the alien hand's agency? We have very clean intuitions about agency. You have it or you don't. You are conscious or you are not. You are the one deciding or something else is deciding for you. Alien hand syndrome corrodes every one of those clean lines. The deeper you go into the split brain literature, the more the unified self begins to look like a diplomatic fiction. Gazzaniga spent decades on this. His conclusion, stated plainly, was that the brain is not a single decision-making entity. It is a collection of semi-autonomous modules. Each module processes information. Each generates outputs. The left hemisphere's interpreter watches those outputs and writes the story. The I that you experience is the narrator, not the author. Think about what this means in practice. You have a strong emotion and then you construct a reason for it. You make a decision and then you experience the decision as the result of reasoning that actually came after. Benjamin Libet's famous experiments in the 1980s showed that measurable brain activity indicating a movement decision appears roughly 550 milliseconds before the person is consciously aware of deciding to move. The decision, at the neural level, precedes the awareness of deciding by more than half a second. We experience ourselves as agents, as the initiators of our actions. The neuroscience keeps suggesting that what we experience as agency may be, at least in part, a story told after the fact. The alien hand is just an unusually visible version of a process that is always running. There is a variant of alien hand syndrome called the anarchic hand. Some researchers use the terms interchangeably, but others make a distinction. The anarchic hand specifically refers to cases where the hand acts in opposition to the patient's conscious intentions, not just independently, but in active contradiction. It undoes what the other hand does. It interferes. It countermands. This distinction matters because it implies something even more uncomfortable. Not just two systems operating in parallel. Two systems in conflict. The anarchic hand is not indifferent to what the conscious self is doing. It is responding to it, countering it, as if something in the motor system has not just its own agenda but its own resistance. Some neuroscientists have proposed that what we are seeing in anarchic hand cases is the expression of suppressed motor programs. Impulses that the frontal inhibitory systems would normally cancel before they reach action. When those inhibitory systems are damaged, the impulse executes. And sometimes the impulse is the opposite of the intended action because intention and inhibition are, in the healthy brain, always in dialogue. The anarchic hand may be what happens when the argument inside your nervous system becomes visible. What does this mean for identity? For selfhood? These are not abstract questions. They land in real lives, on real people, in real rooms. The patients with alien hand syndrome are not philosophical case studies. They are people trying to eat breakfast while one hand takes the spoon out of the other. People trying to dress while their body argues with itself. People who have to explain to other people that the hand that just reached out and grabbed someone's arm did not belong to them in any meaningful way. The psychiatric dimension of this is significant and underexplored. Some patients develop what clinicians describe as depersonalization relative to the alien hand. They begin to refer to it in the third person. They develop a kind of dissociative relationship with a limb. And this is not pathological in the context. It is adaptive. The mind is doing what the mind always does when confronted with information that does not fit its model. It revises the model. It redraws the boundary of self. If the hand is not behaving as part of you, you stop calling it part of you. You externalize it. You give it a name. You manage it. You have a relationship with it that is structured the way a relationship with another person is structured. Negotiation. Frustration. Occasional compliance. The echo in all of this is not subtle. What the alien hand makes visible, what the split brain experiments exposed, what Gazzaniga's interpreter theory describes, is a principle that the entire field of cognitive science and much of psychoanalysis has been circling for over a century. We are not single. We are a committee. We are a collection of systems that arrive at behavior through a process that is not democratic and not always coherent. The alien hand is the committee member that stopped pretending to cooperate. Every impulse you have ever suppressed. Every urge you recognized and chose not to act on. Every moment where you wanted to do one thing and made yourself do another. There was a mechanism managing that. A conversation between systems. And in the vast majority of people, that conversation stays invisible. The management works. The story of a unified self holds together because the seams are never exposed. Alien hand syndrome pulls a seam open. It makes the architecture legible. And what it shows us is that what we call I is less a thing and more a process. Less a self and more a negotiation. Less an author and more a very convincing editor, working on material it did not generate, calling it its own. The woman in Rome eventually found strategies. She learned to keep her left hand occupied when performing tasks that required both hands to cooperate. She spoke about her experience in interviews with a quality that is hard to categorize. Not horror. Not humor. Something closer to philosophical displacement. As if the experience had permanently shifted where she located herself in relation to her body. She said something that stayed in the literature. She said that before the damage she had never once thought about who was in charge of her hands. The question had never occurred to her. Afterward, she said, it was the only question. That is the gift and the wound of conditions like this. They make visible what health keeps hidden. They force a confrontation with the machinery behind the performance. And once you have seen it, the performance is never quite the same. The hand that fought its owner was not an anomaly. It was a window. And what it showed, for anyone willing to look, was not a broken brain. It was the ordinary brain, with its ordinary divisions, its ordinary negotiations, its ordinary multiplicity, stripped of the seamless interface we call consciousness. You are not one. You have never been one. You have simply been, until now, very good at the performance of singularity. This has been the echo principle. We map the unseen blueprints of human behavior. The self you defend so instinctively, the I you would swear on, may be the most sophisticated story your brain has ever told. We will see you in the next one.